Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or whatever timeline or alternate reality you currently exist in. Welcome to Transdimensional Realities, where we delve into the stranger aspects of our perceived existence. I'm your host, Milyssa Lee, here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and really happy to see the leaves all coming in. It actually almost looks like summer. We've even had some warmer temperatures here in the Northeast. I'm a happy girl. I can't wait. This is going to be a nice summer. Now, our guest tonight, very special guest. His name is Doug Owen. He's a nonfiction author and independent paranormal investigator. He's the founder of Authentic Haunted, which is based in Idaho. Now, Doug has devoted decades of conducting paranormal research at some of America's most enigmatic and haunted locations. He's the author of The Unholy Silence, which chronicles his terrifying experiences living in an extremely haunted house. Doug is also the host of the Unholy Podcast, which is now available here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. So let's welcome Doug to the program. So, Doug, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, you got your book and your podcast now, the Unholy Podcast. You're here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. We're happy to have you.
Uh,
But
it's
all
great.
of this seemed to have started with your own personal experiences, and that's what I really would love to talk to you about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, where did everything start? What was it, the house you grew up in, or was it another house?
No, strangely enough, I never had really a paranormal experience growing up. It kind of began after I was the victim of a real estate swindle. Now, the house I was living in at the time, a friend of mine had defaulted on their loan. I contacted the mortgage company and asked for a short sale. They granted it to me. So I had 90 days to come up with the money to buy the house, and they priced it obscenely cheap for me. The problem was, I was 21 years old, didn't have the greatest credit, and unfortunately, the lender that I chose, a recommendation from a friend, turned out to be a swindler. He purchased the home out from under me, claiming that he would give me some time to get my credit to the point where I could purchase the home. And unfortunately, he raised the rent $3,000 a month until it basically was unaffordable. So in Idaho, it's really interesting. A landlord can raise the rent any amount he wants to as long as he gives you 30-day notice. So it was a terrible scandal. And I was fed up. I was angry. And eventually, a series of events led me to the Catholic Church. And when I showed up there and explained to him what was going on, the priest, um, number one, he asked me if I wanted to become Catholic. I was like, okay, I guess so. I don't know. And the second thing was he had some parishioners who were involved in real estate. So they had a home that was a lease to own option that they got me into.
Wow. So, with the lease to own house you moved into, is that when everything started?
That is when things began. And it was about 3 weeks into living there. We had finally felt like we could breathe. It was a sigh of relief because we were mentally exhausted. We were physically exhausted and spiritually exhausted. Now, at the time I moved in there, I was still becoming a newly minted Catholic at the time. And it takes a while. It takes about a year to become a Catholic. You've got to study, you've got to throw yourself into this, basically immerse yourself in the Catholic way. And when I did that, the first thing that happened was the window downstairs. And it was an older 1950s house with a basement. And the windows for an egress to get out were, meant for really scrawny, skinny people. And they were the type of window that downstairs that folded inward on those old hinges and the brass
Mm,
latch. So the window would not stay closed no matter what I did. And it was really difficult to get to the window because I wasn't tall enough to reach it. So I had to climb up, and this is terrible, climb up on my washing machine on my knees and then close it every time. And this would happen 10 times a day. And I couldn't figure out why it was happening. So that was the first thing. The second big thing is that my daughter had gotten into trouble at school, and my wife and I at the time sat her down on her bed. Her back was to the window outside, and we were up a good 15 feet. It was raised from the ground, so nobody could really look into the kid's bedroom. You would have to get a
Hmm.
step ladder. And we were explaining to her how to behave at school and the trouble. And running by the window, we could see clear as day a teenage boy, maybe 14, 15 years old. And we could see from his waist all the way to the top of his head. Perfect bowl cut, kind of a strawberry blonde reddish, and a bright canary t-shirt. Ran right by the window. And I was shocked. And I think, I said, what the fuck was that? Jumped up 3 steps, I'm at the front door, 3 more steps, I'm at the side of the house outside. And there was nothing. And in order for him to have done what he did, he would have had to have been, I estimate, probably 15 to 16 feet tall, and ran into a fence of mine that had no gate. And
Hmm.
even if by some miracle he had jumped like Michael Jordan and levitated by the window, he wouldn't have been able to make it over the fence. And if he did, there was a protective Rottweiler waiting for him. So it was one of those situations where we saw it clear as day, no mist, no smoke. There was no shifting or phasing of any kind. It was as clear as I can see you. Technicolor. It was perfect. No sound. It was silent, but it was enough that my wife at the time had asked me, "What is that? What did you see that?" Yeah, I saw it. Well, what is it? Well, I don't really have an explanation. I don't know what it was. So it was the first sign that something was going on.
Okay. Did you know how old the house was or know the history of the property at all?
Well, I did research it later, and I found it was in 1952. It was built here in Nampa, Idaho. Nothing unusual. Good neighborhood. No Native American burial grounds or anything like that underneath that I could tell or that I knew of.
Hmm.
The records here are basically just incomplete. A couple of owners, nothing suspicious, nothing bizarre, nothing odd. It was, and in Idaho here, they did a technique in the 50s where they mimicked Victorian style construction. The walls were the hard lath and plaster,
Hmm.
hardwood floors. It was very, very much that way. So yeah, the history of the home, I've researched it, but I can't seem to find anything unusual. It's pretty sterile.
So you leased this from the Catholic Church. Did you ever go back to them and say, "Hey, do you know what's there? Um, did they knowingly lease you a property that they've had problems with?"
Well, they didn't necessarily knew that there was a problem with it. It was another parishioner, I guess, whose mother was ill, and I'm not sure if she passed away in the house, but it became available. And the first thing that they push for, and they really pushed, is to get the home blessed. Almost before we wanted to move in, but we were on a quick timetable here because I was tired of living in my parents' back bedroom with a family of four, as we had to. So we got in fairly quickly, and the first time a deacon came out to bless it, and I say the first time because this house was blessed 3 times, and once by a priest who would come to dinner, and every time it made it so much worse. And yes, I did go to the Catholic Church and I told them, probably about 6 months into living there, something's going on, this is happening. The deacon that night looked at me and he said, "Your house has been blessed 3 times." I said, "Yeah, I know." He told me that no evil can exist where God's love is. I was furious. I said, "You know what? Fuck it. I'm embarrassed. Just ignore it. I'm going home. I'm taking my kids, go home." So I took my daughters and went home. And my wife at the time had worked nights. So I had kind of the night shift dad duty. And my daughter's window upstairs, the same one that we saw the boy run by, kept opening. And I would look for footprints outside. I would look for things and nothing in the neighborhood. So I had taken sheetrock screws, 6 inches, and drilled them. And I didn't care about damaging the house. right through the sill into the sash, or sash into the sill, and I secured it. And I gave my daughter a little Jesus ceramic statue. You've seen them. They're cheap. You can buy them at any novelty store. I said, put Jesus here. You're going to be okay. The window's going to stay shut. I secured it with these sheetrock screws. They're really long and really powerful. Drilled them right in there. So we went into the kitchen to get a drink of water. I got her a drink of water. I said, I'll be there in a minute to tuck you in. Well, she goes in there as I'm taking a sip of water, and I hear her scream. Again, 3 steps, I'm there. It's less than 20 feet away. I go in there, and she's huddled in the corner of her bed like this, shaking. And I look. The Jesus statue has been completely destroyed, shattered into
Hmm.
powder. And the window is open again. And on the screws that are sticking down like the teeth from a demon are chunks of wood from the sill that had been ripped open by force. And the most terrifying thing, the name of my book, The Unholy Silence, a lot of these things happened with no noise. From 20 feet away, I should have heard that window and that wall rip apart. There should have been something. The house was quiet. It was nighttime. It was about 10 o'clock at night.
Hmm.
But that was terrifying. So my remedy, in case people want to know, is I stuck a steel bar in between the frame there. And I said, okay, let's see you bend, some solid steel now, sucker. So incidents like that had occurred and had been occurring. My daughter had reported that a sickly boy crawled out from under her bed nightly, crawled into the hallway and vomited and then disappeared. And he would throw a ball out that she had under her bed, a volleyball. He would roll it out of there. And one night I heard her scream, and of course I ran up the stairs and checked on her and saw. And she told me, "Dad, there's someone in my closet." Of course, being the big defender, I ripped the closet doors open. Nobody was there. However, all of her clothing on the hangers were swinging like we were a ship at sea. It was remarkable. So incidents like that began at the house, and it seemed the harder I fought, the more holy water I flung, the more crucifixes I put up, the worse it got.
Yep. Yep. Um, it seems in my experience that the more attention you give these things, the more powerful they become because they feed off your energy. If you're giving energy, because everything is energy, if you're giving
Sure.
energy to something, acknowledging it, fighting it, or whatever, it's just going to keep lapping it up because that's what it wants. I call them paranormal parasites. They just latch on to, and the more afraid they can make you, because they'll feed off of the negative emotions. You're afraid or angry or whatever. They feed off it and continue to get stronger. That's why a lot of times when the people come in and the church or whoever come in, bless the house, or people using sage. You know what sage does? It stinks up the house. Because
Right.
well, I'll get into this more a little bit later. I want to hear your story, but intent is everything. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, what else was happening?
Well, there was a lot of different incidents, and I stayed in the house for a little over a year. And one of the most interesting things in retrospect, looking back at how the family unit started to crumble. Here I was, father, husband, provider, and others in the house, began their own journey. My wife at the time, unfortunately, had begun affairs with coworkers, and started stepping outside of the marriage. And of course, that added to the emotional and psychological stress of everything and the upset. And, it just, and here's the bizarre thing. Thinking back on it, I gave paper thin explanations because everybody looked to me for answers. And I didn't really acknowledge it. We never sat down at the table and said, okay, we're going to do a war room. Why don't everybody go around the table, tell me what you've experienced, and let's see if we can figure this. We never did that.
Hmm.
We, as parents, myself, just kind of, as the kids looking up to me, going, "What the fuck was that?" They didn't say that, but what was that? and I would dismiss it, dismiss it as something scientific, even though I had no idea how that could have happened. But another incident that the kids had asked me about was, uh, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon or evening time. We were downstairs watching a movie or a television show, and upstairs, hardwood floors, as I mentioned. We hear the door unlock, open and close very loudly, very echoey. We had no carpet upstairs, so the sound travels. So we hear the door open and close and lock behind whoever it is. And we hear the familiar clicking of my wife's heels across the hardwood floor. Now, my two daughters look at each other in unison. They say, "Mom's home." Of course, what followed was jinx, double jinx, triple jinx, quadruple. Okay, girls, that's enough. Okay, I'll turn off the TV, go see your mom, get your plates, because they had snack after school. So they take their plates upstairs, and I turn the TV off, and I meet them on the stairs as they're coming back down. I said, "What's going on?" They said, "Well, mom's not here." I said, "Yeah, she is. We heard her. Go. She's in the bathroom. Go check on her." We all went upstairs together. The door still locked with the chain engaged. I look outside, no car, no wife, nothing, just as I had left it. The kids are looking at me for answers. I text my wife real quick. "Hey, did you swing by for something? Did you come back home real quick?" Because she left about 2 o'clock, 2:30. I figured she'd swung back by the house. She said, "No, she's been there the whole time." So I'm okay. All right, kids. Well, it must have been something else. It must have been the house settling or shifting. Let's go back downstairs, finish our movie. And as we walk downstairs, the kids are in front of me. They go down the stairs, and I'm following them. And I hear the door to the garage, and I hear this noise. So I go out and I turn the light on, and I find my electric sander plugged in and tossed underneath of the project car I was restoring, an old Chevy. And it was bouncing up and down, hitting the subframe underneath, smacking around.
Hmm.
So I went over there, unplugged it, put it back there. I'm pretty meticulous with my tools. I keep things in good order, and I certainly wouldn't have left the sander on the floor, let alone plugged in. So, and it was an old house too. I had to be very careful about the electrical system. So I was always conscious about unplugging things because I had the old screw style fuses, even,
Oh yeah.
And
You don't
so
know, and probably old wiring in the walls
old
too.
wiring. So I was terrified that, it was going to catch, not that it would, burn. I mean, as far as I knew, the walls were, solid concrete, plaster. So, yeah, so that was one of the other incidents that the kids had experienced there. But even the housewarming party that I had, and I had a whole bunch of people come over. And yes, unfortunately, my coworkers in Idaho, you can imagine Idaho rednecks, cowboys, hillbilly, whatever you want to call them. Red Solo cups, I think I had purchased a keg or something like that to housewarm. I was very excited. And my daughters had come in telling me that the tree we had just planted out front was talking to them and tried to get them to come closer. They claimed it was a male's voice that tried to get them over to the tree as they were outside. Now, this is about dusk, so the light's waning. It's going. So it's kind of a purple haze outside in the sky. Beautiful sunset. So I can tell you that half of the men dropped their solo cup, the other half held on to their solo cups, and they ran outside. And I had probably 10 to 15 of these testosterone filled men looking around the neighborhood to beat somebody's ass who tried to coax my children, into the windowless van or whatever they thought in their minds. But
Right.
they scoured the neighborhood. They looked under cars. They jumped my neighbor's fence. They looked behind her stacked wood pile, bushes everywhere. It was spread out like a huge search party. Nothing was found. So that was one of the first incidents there too in the house that really was unexplained. And talking to my daughter's now almost 30 years old, and to this day she still remembers the voice. It was a masculine, deep voice emanating right from the tree.
That is interesting, and it calls up a lot of stories I've been hearing recently, coming out of the Appalachian Mountain Range, where people are talking about all this paranormal activity and voices coming from the woods, trees that maybe are not trees or doing things. You hear your name being called. It's the rule in Appalachia. If you hear your name being called, no, you didn't. You see something in the woods? No, you didn't. Um, but that kind of thing, it happens everywhere, and this is where it starts getting beyond what you would consider to be a haunting. That
Yes,
there's something else there, maybe not necessarily someone who died, but something that's already been attached to the land.
absolutely. Absolutely. And, every morning I would go to work and I would feel something chase me up the stairs. Of course, when I looked, there was nothing there, but that's that extrasensory perception that you have where something is following you, something's behind you. So I'd take the stairs four at a time. I would bound up the stairs like Michael Jordan. It was crazy. But yeah, in the house, uneasy feelings, uneasiness. And we conducted our lives. And when you're an adult, obviously we've got bills to pay, we've got health concerns, we've got a family to raise the kids. You don't really focus on the unseen and the paranormal. And I went to the Catholic Church for help. I had friends come over who were sensitive to this type of thing. My mentor and colleague, Mark DeWire, he was gifted from a young age. He'd experienced, and he was an antique collector. Unfortunately, recently he had passed away a couple of years ago, but he had the most fascinating antiques, and he could tell an object either good or bad by touching it. And some of the antiques he wouldn't buy. He had had visions and smells of rotting flesh at times when he would touch things. So, of course, I consulted him and said, look, come to the house. He brought over on Thanksgiving Day a woman. I believe her name was Susan. And she'd come into the house, and I met her at the door to greet her. Well, Susan walked by me as if I wasn't there, her eyes focused on my downstairs area, like she knew where the stairs were. And she walked almost like she was in a trance and just continued past me. And she led the party downstairs there. And then when we were downstairs, where it seemed to be the center of a lot of the activity, she spoke in what appeared to be a child's voice. And she claimed that this boy's name was Timmy. And Timmy was also plagued by other things in the house that didn't want us there. So the mischievous pranks of the keys being moved, a box of European chocolates I had received from a friend of mine in Bosnia, they had disappeared. And then after everybody had looked an hour later, they reappeared in the pantry right where I had left them, untouched, still wrapped. And things like that were happening. So that would have been the boy. Now, the dark, nasty voices, the terrorizing, of the children, some of the dreams they had at their young age, seeing our young Pomeranian butchered and entrails strewn across my office walls and ceiling.
Wait,
That's
but
pretty,
wait. What?
yeah, yeah. My children had these dreams of our Pomeranian butchered in my office, very detailed, and that's quite the thing for a 12-year-old and
Yeah.
and a 6-year-old to come up with. But they had these visions and they had these dreams and they were terrified. And it seemed to try to do different things to I assume the intent of these things, I think, in retrospect, are to break me of that faith, to crack me, to break me. And here I was, 21 and arrogant, newly minted, thinking, you know what? I've got the Catholic Church, I've got crucifixes, I've got holy water, I've got rosary beads, I've got the Lord's Prayer, and I've got, double holstered, holy water holders, and I'm flinging it all over the place like a gunslinger. And in my arrogance and ignorance, because and keep in mind we're talking 2008 2009,
Mhm.
my MySpace was the pinnacle of social media at the time. There was no Facebook or
No.
TikTok or any of that, so paranormal groups and help was limited. And I reached out. So eventually I did reach out, and I reached out to what is now Big River Paranormal here in Idaho. And at the time she only had about 4 people working for her. And I had set up a meeting for them to come into the house and investigate. And they came in with laser temperature readers and EMF meters and night vision goggles, infrared, all the stuff that you would expect. And they were downstairs. And I told them at the beginning, as I stood outside, I said, okay, well, first of all, these entities don't give a shit who sees it. They don't shy away. And as soon as I did that on cue, as if I had a remote control, the lights start to flicker and dim. I said, see, there it is. So I said, well, I'll stay out here. You know, you guys can go in. I'll take you downstairs and I'll leave you guys in the house to do your thing. Excuse me. So I led them downstairs, and they began their investigation. I came back upstairs and quickly realized, oh shit, I don't have my cigarettes. I left them downstairs in my office. So I went downstairs and I went into my office room there, and the guy was there with lights were all off. He had the goggles on and a laser temperature mic. And I said, hey, can I grab my cigarettes real quick? He's like, yep, just don't touch anything else. I said, okay. Straight to my desk, grabbed my cigarettes, turned around, walked straight out. He's like, hold it. I froze. He said, look at your chair. I turned around, looked at my office chair. It was spinning. He said, did you touch it? I said, no. And it turned around one more time. And my daughter's guitar, one of those little toy first guitars, was sitting in the chair that was upstairs in her bedroom. And he asked me, did you put that there? I said, no, nothing in my hands. I just came in for my cigarettes. I didn't touch the chair. He said, okay, neither did I. And then he temperature read, and it was 10 degrees colder at the chair in the corner where this happened. I said, okay, can I go? I'm gonna go. You guys are gonna find all kinds of cool stuff here. I'm gonna go back upstairs. So I left, went there.
Please tell me you had an IR camera running at that time.
Well, they had all kinds of stuff there, and they documented and found some pretty peculiar things. They wanted to come back and install automated cameras in the corners here, but of course, these things wouldn't allow it. My daughter had a skateboarding accident the night that they were supposed to come over, and I had to rush her to the hospital. So we never got a chance to redo that, but a quarter, 25-cent piece, George Washington quarter, fell from the ceiling directly onto her laptop from nowhere. And the EVPs were enough to give you chills. They were absolutely demonic sounding, nasty threats of killing us if we stayed. And they were horrific. And they did every test imaginable. They made sure that the water heater was on par, that there was no radon or radiation in the basement. They wanted to make sure that we weren't hallucinating. And I agreed. Yeah, absolutely. If I'm, imagining this shit, tell me. I want to know.
Just a real quick interjection. I've experienced that with the quarters. I've been there was one investigation I did. This was many years ago, but we were standing around the homeowners, and there was about 3 or 4 of my investigators and myself, and we were all sitting there having a conversation, and all of a sudden a quarter appeared out of nowhere and dropped right in the middle of all of us and hit the floor. And we were like, and I looked at the clients to see if maybe one of them flicked it or whatever. No. And then a few moments later, I turned to walk out of the kitchen, and the one client is right behind me, and a quarter flew over her head and landed at my feet. So yeah, I've experienced the quarters dropping out of nowhere.
That is interesting. It's never a dime. It's never a penny. It's always a quarter. What a strange.
Well, why couldn't it have been a silver dollar, and then,
Right?
have a couple hundred of them?
I'll take a gold doubloon anytime.
There you go.
Something. But yeah, interestingly, these things, these entities, they didn't care. They didn't care. And I started documenting in my diary. I started writing, which is the basis of my book, to make sure I'm accurately remembering these things. And every time I would try to write and think, I should probably write a book about this, the door behind me would slam. For a second, I would feel my breath. I would hear a creak. And one time when I was writing, I got a mysterious phone call from my wife, who was out with friends at the local bar in Boise. And I picked up the phone, and the noise on the other end sounded like the sound of 1,000 voices screaming in unison. And then it became, as you have heard on many movies and television shows, it became deeper, more animalistic and unnatural. And
Hmm.
so I hang up and called her back. And on her phone record, she had no call log that she called me, nothing. But the house was studying us and studying me. And it was a chess match every day. I played chess with this thing. Now, my neighbor next door was and still is an electrician. Good guy, good family. He had, 3 daughters of his own. And we would meet over the fence, just like you'd see in good old apple pie America. We'd have a cigarette.
Home Improvement. Wilson.
Exactly, home improvement, except we could see his face, right? We had
Yeah.
shorter fence. And one time he had, come over and just handed me a beer randomly. He didn't say anything. And, I waited for him to talk. And, he lit up a cigarette and I had a cigarette and kind of sighed the dad sigh of, okay, yeah, yes, this is, this is our thing. And he pulls me in closer and he says to me, "Your wife's a slut." What? What the John? Why would you say that? I kind of half laughed, thinking it was kind of a joke. It was very strange. I said, "What?" He repeated himself, locking eyes with me. And he said, "Your wife's a slut." And then he smirked and walked away. I said, "Okay." And of course, my thought was, well, okay, does he know that she had had an affair? Does he know what is going on?
Hmm.
How could he have known? We kept it very private. We
Right.
didn't advertise that type of stress. She wouldn't have involved the neighbor in that. So it was strange. And I called to John, "John, hey." No answer. He continued to walk away from me. "John, what are you doing?" John ignored me, went back to his yard work. So the next day, I went out and I was like, that's just weird. And I didn't tell my wife about it at the time. I didn't want to start that argument.
Hmm.
"John, hey, buddy, what's going on? Hey, what was that yesterday? What was that? What are you talking about?" It's like when we met at the fence for a beer yesterday. He's like, "We didn't meet at the fence." "Yeah, we did. And what you said? What'd I say?" I repeated it to him, what he said. He goes, "No, I didn't do that." "John, you did." "No, I wouldn't have said that." He had no recollection of meeting with me or talking to me or saying that. And I searched his eyes for deception. He genuinely looked confused and had no recollection. And it was so out of character. And I dismissed it, interestingly enough, until I actually sat down to write the book. I didn't give it a second thought. I didn't really think anything paranormal about it. I
Hmm.
kind of just dismissed it as one too many beers, work related stress, money, whatever it was, and let it go at that. But that seemed to be one of the first times whatever this thing was, the big thing in the house, was trying to upset me, trying to break me.
Two questions I have.
Mm.
Um, what do you think that your neighbor might have been possessed or something was using him to do this? Or do you think it was possibly a doppelganger?
You see, I thought about the doppelganger theory, but I mean, the detail, and this man had striking eyes, and I'm not convinced that doppelgangers can replicate down to the microscopic level. Maybe they can. I don't know about it enough, but no, I believed it was him. I mean, with the clothing and everything else, and he was
Hmm.
he was always in his yard. I mean, always. um very few times he was inside the house. In fact, even at nighttime, to get my attention, he would shine a laser pointer through my window to come out and have a cigarette and a beer. But we had a yard competition going on to see who could get the nicest, greenest yard. And of course, he spent thousands of dollars to make that happen, and me, not so much. But Yeah, I kind of think that it was the first possession is what I'll call it. He had no recollection of it because another incident did happen later on that would substantiate this. But before I get to that, so mass takes about an hour. If you're a Catholic, the homily takes 45 minutes, 15 minutes to run the cattle through the line to get your wine and your communion. So 9:15 in the morning, we head to church on a Sunday. My wife, my two daughters, and myself. And we go, and it's just a typical mass, typical homily. We come back home, and it's about 10:30. Doesn't take very long. My neighbor John is in the yard, of course, mowing his yard. And he had a huge lot, like 4 times the size of a normal. It's almost a football field size, crazy. So he had a riding lawnmower, and he was out, and it took him a while. As I pull up to the house, I notice that the front door is open. And I asked my wife, "Did you leave the front door open?" She said, "No." So I pull into the driveway a little further, and I notice that the garage door is open. And not just the garage door, it's the back door to the backyard where, the Rottweiler is. I could see him staring at us through the back door, so he didn't run away. Every window and door in the house was open, every one of them. My first instinct was, okay, this bastard's playing a joke on me. So I tell my wife and kids, "Stay in the car there for a minute. I'll be right back." So I flag down my neighbor, "John, did you do this? Is this you? Or are you fucking with me? What is this?" "No, no, I haven't seen anybody. I've just been mowing my lawn. That's it." I said, "Okay, well, that's crazy. I locked up the house and left, and every door and window is open." He's like, "No, it wasn't me." So, of course, I called the police before I went into the house. I could hear noise coming from the house. I was like, "I'm not going in there." So the police come, they go inside, and they come back about 10 minutes later. Two officers, deputies. They come out and they tell me, "Well, Mr. Owen, the good news is that there's no sign of forced entry and nobody's in your house. So take comfort in that." "Okay, thank you. Perfect." And they exchange a glance with each other. I said, "Okay, well, what else?" They said, "Well, we've got to tell you that your stereo, your receiver, was turned on all the way full volume on static, just nasty static
Mhm.
noise." "Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Anything else?" And they look at each other again. I said, "What?" They said, "Well, we have to tell you that every mirror in your house is also shattered." I said, "What?" They said, "Yeah, every mirror in your house is shattered. So whoever did this isn't afraid to escalate. Do you have any enemies?" "None that I know of." "You have anybody who might want to seek revenge for something or attack?" "No, no idea." And I said, "My neighbor was here the whole time. He said he saw nobody. Not even a car had driven up the street. It's 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning in Podunk, Nampa, Idaho. There's no traffic. We're in the suburbs here." So they said, "Well, sir, you should probably get a better security system here." I said, "Well, I'll see what's going on. I'll do my best. Thank you so much." So they left. I went in the house, and of course, we're cleaning up the messes. And it wasn't just the mirrors in the wall. It wasn't just the vanity. As I looked through things, it was the makeup compacts that my wife had, the makeup that my children had to play dress up with. It was the dental mirrors shattered in the drawers. It was the forgotten shaving mirror in a travel kit tucked behind the toilet paper under the sink. Forgotten about long ago. Every single mirror had been shattered with force, outward explosion force, broken. Probably 15 mirrors in all destroyed in less than an hour. All the windows and doors opened, less than an hour from stereo turned on, full blast. And the dog didn't run away. So, whatever it was, the dog didn't want to seem to flee and run.
Your neighborhood, your neighbors, did anyone else, the time that you lived there, or even after, say that they had weird things happening in their houses? Or was it just you?
It seemed to be just me, it seemed to be just focused on me and my family.
And being a suburban type neighborhood, I'm just going to assume you can confirm that you just had houses on both sides of you and they're relatively close together with like that fence that you talk about, like home
Yeah,
improvement. You know, it's like
yeah,
a typical suburban neighborhood.
yeah, exactly. In 1950s, they gave everybody a little bit of space as well. So, we couldn't hear the neighbors, and they couldn't really hear us. There was a good distance beside between us, and then between my neighbor John and our house, he had a good probably 50 feet of yard between the fence, and also there was a little garden path. In fact, I had him help me level it and install the stepping stones there. A good neighbor, always willing to help out and make improvements and help out when he could. He'd like to stay
Mhm.
busy. But yeah, there was a buffer between there, so we couldn't actually hear it. But yeah, there was no activity reported by the neighbors at all. Neighbors across the street were typical, red-blooded Americans. Their son had enlisted in the military. Unfortunately, he was killed in action. Um, he was a nice neighbor kid, run up and down the street playing ball all the time before he was shipped out, and you know they had heartache and those things that happened. But yeah, nothing in the neighborhood that would be considered to be paranormal.
Hmm. Very curious. Very curious. So, what happened after that point? Was there any particular events that made you say, okay, that's it, I've had enough, we're leaving?
Absolutely. The only time I've really been terrified. The rest of this, when you're haunted, there's always a certain shame that goes with it, as I always say. Society doesn't really know how to treat the differently abled. If you're depressed, you hide it. If you're disabled, you minimize it. And if you're haunted, well, you better damn well keep it to yourself, because there's two possibilities. You're either insane or you're damned. And you don't want people to look at you differently. You just don't want to do that. You want to fit into society if you can. So people knew that my place was haunted. People would make jokes if I called in to work sick. They'd be like, "Oh, the spirits got it." They would laugh it up, and it became more of a circus event. People would come over to my house just to see if something supernatural would happen. Um, there's one day, and this is the time where I was absolutely terrified. So one day, my wife had gone off to work, and I had friends come over, friends, that were both of our friends. A woman, she was about 24 at the time, I think, and her friend, who I'd never met before, they had come over to help me plan this Christmas party I was going to throw. And I had just received an award, the Cambridge Who's Who for Business Excellence. We are going to throw a party. Anyway, so we all got together, and they were going to help me with some of the music, because back then you had to take your music and burn it onto a disc, right? And then play it that way. That was technology, the height of technology. And I had people who wanted to sing karaoke in the backyard, and it was going to be a big party. So they had come over to help me sort the music out, get a playlist. And I was older. I was 30, 32 at the time, maybe. Maybe. Yeah, I think so. Maybe I just turned 30. It was in my 20s. They were younger. So Meg and her friend Josie had come over, and they were sitting on the floor of my office area there, and going through discs, CDs, and then picking ones that I was going to put on the computer and burn. My daughter had come home, and she was about 10, 12 at the time. And she'd come downstairs, and I was like, "Oh, hi, honey. How was school?" She said, "Oh, it's good, good, no problems." I was like, "Okay." I said, "Well, this is Josie. Meg. You've met her before, but this is Josie. This is Meg's best friend." So they came to help us set up, the music for the party, and she made introductions, and she says, "Well, Dad, I'm gonna go cook some of those Totino's pizzas that we got at Costco. Cheapy little $1 ones.
Mhm.
You want one?" I said, "No, I'm good." And she asked, I said, "Well, maybe Meg or Josie would want one." They're like, "Oh, yes, please, pepperoni. Oh, I'd take a combination if you got it." So she nods and acknowledges and goes upstairs. So I continue recording, continue putting together a music playlist. And about 45 minutes had passed. And I was just about ready to go check on my daughter when here she comes right down the stairs, and she's got pizzas on plates in her hands. She walks up and she hands Josie her pizza. Josie thanks her. She hands Meg her pizza. Meg thanks her. And she's got a third one in her hand that I assumed was for her, but she started walking towards me. I said, no, no, honey, I don't want one. I'm good. And the thing to know about my kids is this, is that they were good kids. And I didn't have to really spank them. And I never really had to raise my voice because it's very loud. I can boom very loud. It's very, very terrifying. So when I tell my kids something, especially in front of company, they never misbehave. They just don't because, they have manners. I made sure that they have manners. And the kids never disobeyed me. If I told them something, it was the gospel. She kept walking towards me with this pizza. I raised my voice a little. I said, Beth, no, I'm good. Right there. Stop. I don't want a pizza. She continued to walk as if she couldn't hear me. She leaned over across my desk diagonally. And as she did put this pizza down, her face was that far from mine. And I looked at her and I looked at her eyes. And on her face, she had the most sickening, toothless smile, mocking me. And I looked at her eyes and I stared at her for a second, and all of the hairs on my body stood up. Everyone, eyebrow to toe hair, at attention. And I knew that whatever that thing was not my daughter. I was frozen, couldn't move, terrified. I had tried to summon up energy to speak, and eventually I did. And it seemed like decades passed, but it was only a moment. And I summoned up every ounce of energy I had stored up for fantasy home invasion hero scenarios and
Mm-hmm.
those types of things. And I tapped into it. And somehow I was able to muster an incredible sonic boom from my voice, loud enough to shake the windows. And as I screamed at this thing as loud as I could, get away from me or I'll kill you. That boom shook the windows. Josie flipped her pizza over and put her hands up in a reflexatory action as if she was going to be struck by something. My voice was terrifying and booming, and it was this far away from my daughter's face. Whatever it was, it didn't blink. It didn't move. It had no reaction to the incredible decibels I produced. And it was everything I had in me to yell as loud as I could because I knew one thing. Whatever it was, I didn't want it to touch me at any cost, as if it was an instant death or a plague. Don't touch me. After I threatened this thing, it continued to smirk, and the smile became wider if it was possible. Slowly, it backed away, slowly, as if in slow motion, making eye contact, never breaking it. It did turn towards the door as it passed between Meg and Josie, turned back again to look at me and make eye contact, and smirked again. Slowly, oh so slowly, walked to the stairs, grabbed the handrail, looked back into my office once more, and smirked, toothless, menacing, mocking me. It walked up the stairs. Now, Josie grabbed her phone. This is her first time she'd met me. She's on the phone, going to call the police. She says, "You can't abuse your kids like that. That's child abuse," and started to dial the police. Meg stopped her. Hold on, stop, Josie. Something's wrong. Don't call the police. Something's wrong. I know his kids. I know how they act. I've known them for like a year. They would never, ever do that. I said, Josie, I apologize. I don't know what that was, but that thing was not my daughter. I said, my kids would never disobey me, especially in front of new company. They just wouldn't. She told me, well, you have to go right upstairs right now and you have to check on her. I said, I can't. I am terrified. I can't move. I said, I'll do it in a minute, but right now I'm shaking. I can't move. I said, I'm sorry I scared you. I didn't mean to frighten you, but I'm telling you guys, that thing is not my daughter. 20 minutes later, I finally muster up the courage. We go upstairs. My daughter is asleep in her bed. We surround the bed and wake her up. And I say to her, "Hey, what is that? What happened?" She looked up confused. She had no recollection of the encounter. She didn't remember meeting Josie. She didn't remember making the pizzas. She has no idea what she was doing for 45 minutes. And the last thing she remembered was getting her backpack on, getting ready to walk home as they dismissed her from school. At that point, I said, "Okay, you've checkmated me. I'm off. I'm off the battlefield. I step off. I am not going to sacrifice my daughter to whatever this thing is in the house." And I stopped. And I stopped praying. I stopped going to church regularly. I stopped with the crucifixes. I took them all down. I unburied the St. Benedict medallions I had put in each corner of the house. And I got rid of the holy water. And it stopped. All the paranormal activity in the house ceased, at least for the extra month I was there, because I was out by January. I had moved. But in that December, prepping for the holiday party, all activity for the entire month, there was not one incident after I threw the towel in. I said, "Okay, I'm out."
That is fascinating. Um, so when this thing, it's, if I'm correct, seemingly was possessing your daughter,
Right.
but when it was in your face and smirking, she had no teeth.
She did have teeth, but her lips wouldn't part. It was toothless, meaning like
Oh, okay.
she
Like,
didn't, she didn't show her smile. It
got
was
it.
that
Okay. Okay.
tight-lipped grin that was just mocking. And the eyes, they looked, they weren't black or yellow or red or anything glowing. It was that familiarity look. When you know somebody, especially your children or your spouse or your partner. You know what they look like. And if there's something wrong in their eyes when they're stressed or they bounce to check or they're having pain or some medical issue or they're trying, even when your spouse or partner is trying to hide something, you can see it. You detect, okay, what's wrong? Nothing. Okay, don't lie to me. I know something's wrong. You know them. Looking at my daughter's eyes, they were soulless, but also in a way mocking. I felt like it was communicating, like, okay, what the fuck are you going to do now? I got you. And I think that the neighbor's incident was the first trial run because that didn't rattle me.
Hmm.
But this, and the two things came out of this in retrospect is that number one, if it is a demon, they can't read your mind or they would have done this day one. Day one, let's hit the kids. We're going to break him of the faith. Job done. It's Miller time, right? It took them over a year to study and to execute this plan. And they successfully broke me of that. Now, I did go back to church, but infrequently. And I didn't pray and make the sign of the cross. And I wasn't as open and visual with my faith and religion. I had stopped that. And as I walked up the aisle, just to I was actually trying to wrap things up, say goodbye to people that I had known there, and kind of planned to make my exodus from the church.
Hmm.
And I turn around, and right there is the priest, the vicar, and a busy man because the community it's in is upscale community, the church, and he is so busy, 10,000 parishioners, give or take. And it was, yeah, it's a huge, huge following. And he never had time. And that one day I had spoken to him when I had become a Catholic was supernatural in itself because he was alone in the church, just kind of waiting for me. He's the only one in the church, which is unusual in itself. But in that year that followed, I couldn't get 5 minutes with him. In fact, confession was taken by another priest. He was so busy to. But there he was standing. And he looks at me and he says, "Hey, I heard a little while ago that you might have something going on in your house. Is everything okay?" And what did I do? I lied my ass off to the priest. "Oh, everything's fine. We had a little hiccup for a minute, but you know what? Everything's great now. Father Ben came out and blessed the house, and so we're good. It's just a little hiccup, but we're fine now." And to my everlasting shame, He looked at me, studied my face, patted me on the shoulder, and moved on to the other parishioners. Now, at that time, I didn't have enough faith in him or the Catholic Church, and it wasn't a slight on him.
Hmm.
I didn't believe that they had the tools or the wherewithal or the perspicacity to actually wage spiritual combat and win without casualties of my family. Well, what if he had come out and made it worse? This was the priest. This was the guy. This is this is his church. This is the guy who's, met the Pope and everything else. If he comes in and doesn't have the clout or the authority to fix this, my other daughter could be targeted. My wife could be targeted. I could be targeted. This could become dangerous and deadly. And I wasn't willing to put my faith into the Holy Catholic Church after all of my attempts to combat this thing had failed. And I wasn't willing to take that risk. So, yes, I make it a point never to lie, but I had to at that point in time because I didn't want to have, that I didn't want to run that risk of it attacking my daughter again. And even to this day, my daughter, as I said, is almost 30 years old now. And she still has no memory of the day that happened, no memory of it at all. And, every once in a while, this is terrible, as we're watching a movie. Sometimes I'll just sprinkle holy water. I'll throw holy water on her just to make sure as a joke. Dad, knock it off. I just got to make sure, I know what I'm sitting with. But, at this time, I'm no longer afraid. The kids are grown. My ex-wife is off doing her own thing, whatever. And, I've had years to study the paranormal and investigate. And that's what I really do. I don't, and people introduce, he's a hunter. No, I'm not a hunter. I don't go ghost hunting. I'm a paranormal investigator. And there's a difference
Hmm.
because what I'm seeking is not a cheap thrill to be caught on camera or a recording to scare people at a Parcheesi party. No, what I'm doing is trying to get to the truth. What are these things? We use words like spirits, ghosts, entities, demons, specters, banshees, cryptids, mimics. We use these terms, but scientifically, do we know the origin of each of these things? Do we know the nature? Do we know the genetic makeup, if there's such a thing? What is the fabric that these things are constructed of from the universe? We just don't know. And to this day, even with our current level of technology, we still don't know what they were. And I personally have never found out exactly what these things were, but their objective was clear: to break me from that Catholic Church.
Now, when you went to the Catholic Church that day and talked to the priest, you were still in the house?
I was. I was getting ready to, I was getting ready to leave. It was it could have been Christmas. I don't recall, but it could have been Christmas Mass. It was, and when you're a Catholic, there's this Catholic guilt, and they talk about it all the time, but it's a real tangible thing. And you feel guilty when you don't show up at church, and nobody shames you, nobody embarrasses you or even mentions it. In fact, if you don't show up at church for 3 weeks, nobody comes to your door and knocks on your door and asks you, "Hey, we missed you at church." Everything. No, they don't have that. Not like other churches where they might check on you. They don't check
Hmm.
on you. And so there's a type of self-imposed, um, shame, I guess it would be, that, you didn't do that. So I was wrapping things up, and I was saying, goodbye, Merry Christmas, whatever it was to people. And yeah, I was still in the house for another couple of weeks. And again, the activity did stop. So, I mean, I guess technically I did lie to the priest, but not really, because it was all good now at that time.
Hmm.
It had passed.
I'm gonna have to do a lot of thinking on this one because I'm like you. I'm an investigator and researcher and trying to find out the truth of things. Some things I think are going to be beyond our comprehension because we are stuck in this three-dimensional physical world and we're dealing with energetic forces that are not from our three-dimensional world. They could come here, interact with us, but they're coming from another level, another reality, another, I don't know. Um, but it's again when they focus so much evil intention on someone, my big question is why?
Yeah.
What are they getting out of it? Other than, again, a lot of cases, and my friend Irene, who's worked for almost 50 years on cases bad like this.
Hmm.
And, a lot of times these things are, as I mentioned before, like a parasite. They're feeding off of your fear, your confusion,
Hmm.
and but then the fact that you stopped everything religious or Catholic at that point in time seemed to satisfy it and make it stop. So
Yeah, absolutely. And if it was a demon and it's sent from the traditional Judeo-Christian belief of hell, boy, they tapped their top agent to come get this thing done. I mean,
mhm.
they're like, look, your quota's low. Send in the big guns. Here you go. Do this, and they nailed it. But yeah, it's interesting because we still don't know if this is a dimensional thing or even spirits. Are they what we think they are? The spirits of a deceased loved one rising from the tombstones, or is it a dimensional thing? Is it the CERN, the particle accelerator? Are we on the event horizon of a black hole slowly being sucked? We just don't know. There's too many variables out there. But the interesting thing is that if it's not Memorex, the recurrent spirits, if it's not that, they seem to be malevolent in nature and they seem to want to disrupt and confuse because these actions, they're unwanted. They're not a positive thing. I've never had an entity or a spirit drop me the next six lottery numbers, or wow, we found this gold buried treasure in the yard. Here's some, bricks of gold that were buried, 300 years ago. No, it's always something negative. It always impacts our daily lives in a negative way. And as you say, if these things feed on negative emotions, stress, and strife, believe me, we were an absolute buffet for this thing to eat.
A lot of these times, and I'm going to keep this brief because I know we're running out of time here. Um, One theory that Irene has been working on is called the ghosts of the mind, and dealing with sometimes thought form types of entities, something created either by somebody else or some other factor, created with negative intent. And because it's created with negative energy, it needs negative energy to feed and continue to grow in strength and power. And causing fear and messing with people is definitely one way to do it.
Interesting.
Now
Interesting.
that's just a theory for one aspect of it. I think I do.
Sure.
I'm on the same page with you and my questions on what are these things. And I think sometimes you could deal with multiple things at once. They could be several separate types of phenomenon happening together,
Mhm.
especially if you're in a location that has that charged energy, whether you're in with a portal or something like that. And some of the experiences that you've mentioned, I've experienced myself before too, but we'll get into that another time. But
Yeah,
Doug, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story.
absolutely.
Now, where can people find your book, The Unholy Silence?
Absolutely. Unholy Silence is available. I think it's 140 countries worldwide. It's on Lulu in Europe, Barnes and Noble, Google Books, Amazon. It's pretty much anywhere you buy books, you can find me. You can also find me at authorDougOwen.com. And on my website, there's links to everything, the radio show, the Unholy Podcast. And, I think that this is a good forum here. I'm going to go ahead and make a little bit of an announcement here. So, in the coming year here, before the end of the year, I will be releasing two new books, Beyond the Unholy and the Unholy Protocol. The Unholy Protocol is going to be a field guide to paranormal investigation. And Beyond the Unholy is going to chronicle my continued sustained hauntings, even to this day, even though I don't have these same malevolent interactions with these entities. Weekly, I'm still plagued, and I use the term lightly, plagued with paranormal and supernatural events happening, doors slamming, objects moving, noises, screams, things of that nature that I still encounter on a daily basis. So, two new books coming out, and look for those coming out before Christmas.
Well, Doug, I definitely want you to come back on so we could talk about your uh, investigative, all the investigations you've done, your continued experiences. That I think in itself will be fascinating. But thank you for taking time out today to talk with me and share your story. I know people are going to find it riveting. I find it riveting, and it's sparking a lot of questions, which I think is a good thing. For people to think more seriously about these things and not just make assumptions based off of pop culture.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Doug.
All right, take care.
Well, that was Doug Owen with his experiences that he put in his book, The Unholy Silence. I'm going to tell you, as an investigator, I found that to be utterly fascinating. The type of activity he was dealing with has reminded me of other cases and witnesses that I've talked to. There were the Pickmans out of Kansas. They're very famous, the Sally House hauntings, first documented by the TV show Sightings back in the 90s. And I had the opportunity once to meet them in person, interview them on another podcast. And a lot of the experience they had very similar to what Doug has experienced. And in a lot of ways, Doug's experiences were more intense. And he does ask a lot of questions came up about what these things are. What would come in to terrorize somebody with their religious beliefs to the point where they walk away from the beliefs, these things calm down. I'm not religious, spiritual, very spiritual, and I don't believe in traditional demons, although I do think there's very nasty things out there. So I'm really curious about this. I'm going to have to talk to Irene about this one and get her thoughts on it. In any case, thank you all for tuning in to this edition of Transdimensional Realities here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And we will see you all next week. So until then, be good humans. We'll talk to you then.